Hey guys, Tarke here. I want to make a quick video giving my thoughts on Harvest not going core. I wasn't planning on making a video on this since I thought I made my thoughts pretty clear over the last several Baeclasts where I discussed the system. However, I was recently interviewed by a fellow YouTuber who's working on a video all about ARPGs and Burnout, and some of the questions he asked me in that interview made me really think a bit more about Harvest, and hopefully framing my thoughts on Harvest through the questions I answered in his interview might give a slightly different light to things. So I'll just quickly go through what exactly it was that framed the interview. Have you ever experienced burnout from ARPGs? Do you think ARPG systems design is about fun versus habit? Highlights and low points of ARPG life cycles? What changes would you like to see in the genre? So this had me thinking all about gameplay loops. Why is it that I play ARPGs? Why do I play the games that I play? Why do I love Path of Exile? Why is Path of Exile the game I've spent so much time in? I've been playing Path of Exile since 2013. It's 7 years later. I tried mathing out. I think I've got somewhere between 10 and 15,000 hours. I've got roughly about 2 years of actual real playtime. 2 years / played. I probably should have done a lot more with my life in that 7-year period. I've played this game a lot. Have I experienced burnout? Yes, I've experienced burnout many times. When is the times I've experienced burnout most with Path of Exile? I generally tend to experience burnout most when there's a stale meta shifts that don't change for a long enough period of times, or when I feel like there aren't problems to solve. The main reason why I play video games is I like solving problems. I've been thinking about this, what are my favorite types of video games? I like strategy games. All of the games that I've put a lot of time into are games that can't be solved, games that can't be completed. I enjoy linear single player narrative games. Those are some of my favorite games, but those are games that I very rarely ever replay. They're games that I play through once, I enjoy it, I put it down, I put it away. The games that I put thousands upon thousands of hours in are these things that can't ever be solved, right? So when does systems that can't be solved, when is the design about fun versus habit? And I feel like Harvest, in a way, becomes more habit than fun, and I'll kind of get back to that. It kind of feels like the ultimate Skinner box, in a way. So, when did I most recently get burnout in Path of Exile? Why did I most recently get burnout in Path of Exile? When did I most recently stop playing Path of Exile? I haven't experienced, true, I hate this game burnout, since sometime around Legacy League. That was the last time I've been like, oh my god, I might have to quit this game. And the reason being is that we had a very long period before 3.0 came out of Legacy and Hobby League. Both of those leagues got extended. They were very long. I think it was combined of 8 or 9 months, just 2 leagues. And the meta was in a very boring place. They just had the massive AoE nerfs. The meta was very stagnant. We had these 2 very extended leagues. And I just didn't enjoy where builds were. I didn't enjoy how the game played at the time. And I was so frustrated with the game. They turned it around eventually. They redid a bunch of the AoE systems. So anyone who played back then can attest. The old nerfed AoE, that period, it was just like projectile is king, everything else is trash. Some people would say projectile is still king. But anyway, I'm getting distracted. The most recent time I've kind of been a bit on Path of Exile was actually in Harvest League. So I really like Harvest conceptually. I think the idea of going out, planting monsters, getting special things from monsters, I think is really cool for fairly obvious reasons. The way that Harvest actually turned out, though, the actual gameplay loop of Harvest, I think is kind of balked, and I'll kind of break it down in a bit. So the most fun I had in Harvest was with the garden. And I think the garden is both too complex and not complex enough to ever be introduced to the game as a core mechanic. So why is that? So the reason I play these games is to solve problems. The problem solving is the reason I play. I don't play for the gameplay. The gameplay is whatever, right? So the first few weeks of Harvest League, when I realized, okay, so I have rare access to very powerful crafts. Every now and again, I'll get an Exalt, I can get an Annul. I could maybe craft something cool with this. What is the best way of optimizing my garden setup to try and get as many of these as possible? Work out how all the Spencer stuff works, the tier 4 farms, all of that stuff. That was really fun for a couple of weeks. It became extra challenging because I set myself the challenge that I wanted to make an efficient garden, which also an aesthetically pleasing garden. And I had like 3 8-hour-long streams of using third-party tools with grids and planning everything out, and I had a lot of fun with that. A lot of people would hate that and would never do that. The problem was, though, is I solved it. The garden isn't an evolving system. It's a very set system. It's you need this many storage tanks, you need this many pylons, you need this many dispensers, and you have this many layouts. There are like 2 or 3 ways of setting it up, and that's it. There's no upgrading the system as it goes on. You just have it. That's really tedious. Life Force doesn't really serve any real purpose. You end up with a point where you end up just printing hundreds of horticulture benches, in which case you have infinite storage of exalts, and then that just isn't very interesting either. If they were a far more limited resource, if you could only ever store 3 exalts at once, 3 annuls at once, which I think is what their original system was. It was originally designed to be very sparse, very limited, then that would have made me feel very differently about Harvest, because you'd have to approach the system far more differently. That could also introduce its own problems where you would end up just like bulk buying seeds, and rather than like saving up like 100 exalts to go into craft, you'd then be a case of buy your 3 exalt seeds. Did it hit? Yes. Great. No. Damn. Got to go buy 3 more. And then it could become just very delayed and very staggered, which may not necessarily be very fun, but anyway. The garden wasn't complex enough for me to have long-term fun in it, but it was still too complex for a lot of people to have fun. A lot of people saw the spreadsheets people were making, they instantly just checked out of the league. They're like, nope, screw that. I do not want to mess around with spreadsheets. I don't play Path to Excel spreadsheets. I'm done. Go away. Screw this. So it was both too complex and not complex enough. Can you imagine having to set up your garden every single league? That wouldn't be a fun system. Then you say, okay, but Tarke, then what if the garden was just a static thing? You do it once and then it never changes. Well, then it's a really boring system. And at that point, why even have it? If it's something that you literally do once and you have to do again, what's the point? Just like, screw that. That is bad game design, if that's the system. So let's get into the actual gameplay loop of Harvest. So the gameplay loop of Harvest is you go into a map, you click on a plant, a chest, you click on a chest, items come out of the chest that do nothing until they've been planted and they've gone through several cycles, at which point enemies spawn. The enemies they spawn are generally very easy, aside from some like the tier 4 beasts can randomly like one-shot you and stuff. The plant fights are complete jokes. They don't do anything, except for after they die, in which case they can kill you very easily. That isn't particularly engaging. So you click on a chest, nothing happens. If there were monsters, if it was in reverse, if it was you had to do a very difficult fight, you then rewarded with a seed, you then plant the seeds and you choose, like, with how you plant the seeds dictates what you get from them, and you made a choice there rather than just a binary get it, plant it, no thought required. Then that could be kind of different, and then you were rewarded with a craft. That could be a system I'd be a lot more in favor of, and you need to keep in mind that this was a league that was designed with a pandemic going on. People had to work out of office. That really just screwed the development of this league, and I would have loved to have seen the full potential of Harvest and what Harvest could have been, because I love the concept. I wish I'd gotten to see the full product. So, just briefly, the loop of I'm running a map, I click a chest, nothing happens, seed drops, nothing happens, I then have one of 2 choices. It's the only choice I make while Harvest crafting. Do I teleport out of my map to go to the garden to plant it now, and then wait several turns doing nothing, interrupting my flow of maps? Or do I just put it in my inventory, wait, stockpile up 100, and then plant them? And the loop isn't fun. If you like deterministic crafting, I completely understand why you like deterministic crafting, but we can all agree the actual gameplay loop of Harvest at its core isn't a good gameplay loop. This lovely lady, very cool NPC, very underwhelming boss. The boss fight was very disappointing. The boss fight also had a very arduous grind of having to do 100 seed rotations. That wasn't engaging or interesting. The boss fight was very boring, and it didn't have very exciting loot. So the gameplay loop of the core mechanic wasn't very fun. It had a overly complex / not complex enough garden, had a not very engaging boss fight, disappointing loot from the boss fight, and the boss fight was a grind fiesta. The core gameplay of that is not something you want. You can make the argument that yes, well, what you could do is if it was completely reworked, completely restructured, and reintroduced, kind of like what they did with Bestiary, then it could be a really great mechanic to make a solid core addition to the game. And that's something that I agree with. That is something that could very well happen. However, that takes time. In which case, will not be immediately become a core feature, but maybe reintroduced in some way in the future. They've left themselves open to the idea that if further down the line they have got the time to do a complete rehaul of the mechanic and reintroduce it, they could do. They could also reintroduce elements of Harvest. They could take parts of the crafting they enjoyed, they could take parts of the gameplay of the garden they enjoyed, and reintroduce it. In its current state, there is no way in which it should go core. You might completely fundamentally disagree with me when it comes to deterministic crafting, whether or not deterministic crafting should be in the game or not, but the actual gameplay loop of Harvest is not a good addition to Path of Exile. I think that's something we can fundamentally agree on. So, with that out of the way, let's get into the main reason why I play Path of Exile and why I think that Harvest deterministic crafting goes against that in my opinion, and I'm very curious to see your thoughts on if you disagree with this, and let's hopefully try and keep this civil. So, PoE is a knowledge, not a skill-based game. There are very few things in Path of Exile which are truly skill-based. That's mostly stuff to do with racing, and then people with very good mechanics when it comes to playing efficiently, and then some of the bosses, but most bosses can just be cheesed through having good builds, good knowledge, good setup, good gear. It's a knowledge-based game. The most fun I have in Path of Exile is in the research. So it's, I want to learn how to play a new build, or I want to plan something out, doing the path of building, going on the forums, asking other content creators, asking other people in my chat who play the same builds. Kind of doing that whole, like, behind-the-scenes networking stuff, doing the research, planning it out, and then executing upon it. That's where I have the most fun. You might not enjoy that, you might find that stuff super tedious, but that's why I enjoy Path of Exile. That was the initial appeal of Path of Exile, and that's the kind of game that the devs seem to want to make from conversations I've had with the devs and the stuff they also enjoy. They enjoy that problem-solving aspect of it. Harvest and deterministic crafting is the answer to all future problems in Path of Exile crafting. Because of how definitive it is, you could never introduce a future system that solved crafting better than Harvest unless you just made the exact same deterministic system but just more accessible. Like, it just had less grind associated to it. Because it's the be-all solution to everything, I feel like it becomes a complete Skinner box, and some people might disagree with me when I say that. They might say, well, no, surely RNG crafting is more of a Skinner box of just doing the same thing over and over and over again, waiting for a set result. The thing is not being able to guarantee something is kind of fun, for me at least. There's something to be said about having a long-term goal and not actually achieving that goal. You may not achieve that goal, but you might actually stumble upon a different goal. You might say, I want to one day own... For a lot of people, be a headhunter or a mirror. Like, they want to one day farm that. Some people, when they get that headhunter, they'll be like, this is the best thing that's ever happened. And there'll be someone who, at that point, every single league, they will be a headhunter gamer, and they must get a headhunter every league. I know people who they've set themselves the goal of, I must get headhunter this league. They get the headhunter, they do, like, I don't know, 100 maps with it, and then they quit. Because they're like, I'm done. If you're the kind of person who, for you, the goal is to get the perfect item, be it the perfect crafted item through Harvest Crafting, getting the headhunter, getting the mirror, and you can continue to keep playing for 100 hours, 1,000 hours, I envy you. I wish I could be like you. For me, it's I set myself the goal, and then once I've achieved the goal, I need to set a new one very quickly, otherwise I just get bored, and then I quit, and I wait until the next league. Now, you could make the argument, well, Tarke, there's nothing wrong with quitting. Like, there's nothing wrong with just stopping, and I agree, there is nothing wrong with setting a goal, achieving your goal, and stopping. You don't have to play 3 months of the league. And yes, I'm incentivized to play 3 months of every league because I'm a content creator, but there's nothing wrong with, achieving all of your goals in 2 weeks and stopping. That's basically kind of what happened with me with Harvest, this league. I made my Corsair character. I had a really good set of gear on it. I'd crafted some items on that gear, which were better than anything I'd ever crafted before. I had an insane double dot multi life attack speed max chaos res quiver. A quiver that if I'd had in any previous league, I would have been like, oh my god, this is the best quiver I've ever seen. When I saw that quiver in Harvest League, I just looked at it and said, well, it hasn't got tier 1 life. It's only got like 70, I think it was like 69 life. And I was like, wow, it's not that great. There was this god tier item staring at me, an item I'd never had something that powerful. I'm like, well, it could have better life on it. And how would I get better life on that? The quiver was complete. The only way you do it is you just spam add remove life, and you just spam add remove life on it until you got tier 1, and that'll be it. That isn't engaging to me. So there are 2 ways I'd go about doing that. So way 1 is I would just go on to global chats or discords or ask friends saying, have you got add remove life? And I would just sit there for a couple of hours, and then I would have to give someone my god quiver and pray they don't scam me. Or I would have to just buy up hundreds of seeds, or I would just map, and then every other day, every other whatever, whenever I got that craft, it'd be add remove, did I get it? Yes, no, and it just becomes binary at that point. If you're someone who can just endlessly map, and for you, the idea that you could just endlessly map every single day, and you just spam, like, add remove life, and that will keep you engaging, I envy you so much. I envy you so much. You're the kind of person who plays Path of Exile primarily for the gameplay, not so much for the problem, I would say. If that's the thing. If you enjoy just that core gameplay loop so much, I wish I could be that person. But I'm not. Because I'm not that person, I don't like Harvest. Because so much of Harvest just boils down to ultimately that. Do the exact same content over and over and over again, with nothing changing. Harvest is the solution to all crafting problems, and it's just a matter of just, you've got all the mods, add remove, add remove, add remove, add remove, add remove, add remove. Did you get it? Yes, cool. I had a very similar problem with a trap build. I was really excited to play a trap build. I'd spent a couple of days on Path of Building. I'd been planning everything out, and I wanted to make a really cool lightning trapper. I'm like, okay, well, how's the best way of doing it? Well, if I used daggers blocks a bunch of mods, and I spent a couple of hours and I planned out the best way of crafting amazing crit lightning cast daggers. That was really fun planning it out. How did I go about actually crafting it? It took me about 30 minutes because I'd previously mapped enough in the league that I had all my crafts saved up. I had enough for everything. And it was just a matter of, I know exactly how to do this. This is just a formula. And I just go through it in the right steps that I've planned out. And it was fun planning it out. But once you've planned it out, that system never changes. That is the set way that if I was to ever craft that dagger, I would do it the exact same way every single time. And it would be a guarantee. It would just be a matter of when. And for me, that no longer becomes interesting because you're effectively just making uniques. Every single league, you're like, the items are set. This is the correct way. You will always do it this way, and everything becomes kind of homogenized. There are cases where you can use Harvest to make very wacky individual items, and if there were a lot more wacky individual mods and items which had crazier distinct interactions, if they were to crazy like flood all the pools with these very specific niche mods, then I might feel very different about deterministic crafting. But with the current mod system we have, yeah, I just don't think that's the case. Also, it comes into content challenge. So one of the main arguments I see in favor of Harvest is like, okay, Tarke, I get it. Like on the top end, it can be a problem, but it's really good for the people on the bottom end to get them first steps into crafting. They can finally make their items. I would completely agree with that system if Path of Exile was a significantly harder game. Currently, you can do nearly all of the content in Path of Exile with 50% of the power. The only things you really need these like disgusting items for is doing like tier 19 100% delirium maps and then really deep delve. Both of those systems aren't engaged with by the players that we're talking about. The players we're talking about who like get eased into maps, who get their first serious kill ever because they're finally able to craft their own items, those aren't the players pushing like 2000 delve. Those aren't the players doing 100% delirium tier 19 maps. Sadly, they're not, right? This system doesn't enable that. If you needed to craft these insane god tier items to be able to get into the early steps of content, I would be full for deterministic crafting. You could make the argument, okay, but Tarke, we could make Harvest go core, and then afterwards we could make the game significantly harder, and we could have it so that we have this insane level of challenge that requires this stuff. Sure, but then let's make the game significantly harder first. Let's rework Harvest as they may do in the future. And then once the game is like, okay, the game's at a point where it's punching off that we need the systems, then reintroduce the system. Because all that would happen in the meantime is the game will become significantly easier to play because our player power would go crazy up. The game wouldn't get significantly harder. So until they made the game much harder, we just have a vacuum of a couple of leagues, however long it might take them, of our players, of the player power just being way, way higher. I will always enjoy Path of Exile the most when it is filled with problems I can't easily solve and when the game is super challenging. It's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed Delirium at launch, because Delirium was really punishing. Delirium had a lot of issues, but I really enjoyed Delirium at launch because it made me struggle. I enjoy Path of Exile that makes you struggle. And you could say, Tarke, if you're someone who enjoys Path of Exile that makes you struggle, then just play trash builds. You don't have to use these systems. Players will always go for the path of least resistance. When you say to people, just set a bunch of arbitrary rules and restrict yourself, I already play only SSF and private leagues. I already set a bunch of established rules. I only play SSF and I only play private leagues because I knew that if I played softcore trade league, I would be bored within like a week because I would achieve all of my goals in the first 5 days of the league because I would have too much accessibility. I already limit my accessibility by a crazy umpteenth degree. You could say, okay, Tarke, then go back to only playing hardcore SSF. Maybe one day I will do that. Path of Exile would have to change quite a lot for me to one day want to go back to playing only hardcore SSF. Stuff like Harvest, Triple on Death effects are stuff which kind of make me not want to play hardcore anymore. The game design doesn't really facilitate that, but that's a separate point. So, yeah, there's a couple of issues there when it's like, well, just don't engage with system. I want to use this as an example. It's one of my most vivid memories of playing Diablo 3. So there was a period in Diablo 3, there were multiple periods of Diablo 3 where the game was super challenging. And it was really fun, but it made the gear grind really difficult because you had to be doing the super difficult content to get the gear to enable you to do the super difficult content, which is a bit of a problem. So what people started doing is they started working out places where there would be chests near waypoints. And you would go on the hardest difficulty, you would load the waypoint, click the chest right next to the waypoint, get the loot from chest, allow them to kill any monsters, and you just spend thousands of hours just chain resetting chests to get loot without killing anything. Players will always gravitate towards the path of least resistance. It's not fun. Some people didn't do it because they realized this is boring as all hell. People will always go towards the least effort required. It's just human nature. That's just how we work as a people, as a species, rather, as a society. I wanted to fit that in there. So, but yeah, it's just how we work. So not only does Harvest solve all problems, it invalidates all previous crafting systems. In a world with Harvest, you use Harvest at everything. If fossil crafting, which I thought was a bit too broken, was broken, Harvest crafting is like very extreme. You can never make anything better than that. Like, you can't make anything better than fully deterministic item editing, which is ultimately what this is. This is just item editing with steps attached. It detracts from raw currency. Raw currency was one of the most exciting elements of Path of Exile to me initially. When I first started playing in 2013, the idea of a game which shouldn't have gold, where you had these orbs that would drop and use those orbs to craft all your own items, that was such a unique selling point. That was such a fun system, and that, to me, still is one of the core fun systems. The pre-harvest crafting system is one of my favorite systems about Path of Exile. That's why I continue to play Path of Exile over playing other ARPGs. That's why I play Path of Exile over something like Diablo. Diablo has far better gameplay. Diablo is a far smoother game to play than Path of Exile. If I wanted good gameplay, I'll play Diablo 3. I like the crafting systems. I like the bits of grind that are associated with the content. That being said, and this is something which kind of comes back into my harvest thing, and this is also just in relevance to that interview that I had earlier, one big issue I do have with Path of Exile, and it's one of my growing concerns with Path of Exile, is the gameplay loop of Path of Exile. It's something which does worry me a bit. A lot of Path of Exile has become tied to managing random different menus and UI, and much of Harvest is, again, just like managing all these different benches, clicking in and out of these things. I never want my gameplay to just be managing menus. So what I mean by that is the whole Cirrus thing and like unlocking your conquerors. A lot of that boils down to opening and closing your atlas. What part of the atlas is highlighted? Okay, this is the green chunk, so I run this region. Lex, let's go into my stash. Let's search for Lex in the map stash. All of that like busy work has kind of gotten into the way of a lot of the core gameplay of Path of Exile for me. I want to be stripping a lot of that back. I kind of want to be going back to the core fundamentals of I'm choosing the maps I run the maps, items drop. The items that drop are meaningful. I'm excited to pick up the items. I'm picking up less items are dropping. I'm picking up less items, but those items are exciting. I'm spending less time managing those items in my stash, but I'm excited, and I'm using the currency I pick up on in maps on those items, and I want everything to go back to that core system. I want to get away from all of these menus. And I feel like Harvest just adds so much unnecessary bloat in the way that the crafting works, in the way the gameplay loop works, in the way that the harvest works, and the garden, all that. We want to be getting rid of this bloat. We don't want to be adding more systems. We want to be refining our core systems. Yes. I want to finish with a quick story, because I think it's relevant to all of this. And I was very fortunate when I went to New Zealand for ExileCon, that after the convention, I got to go to the studio. And I got to hang out in the studio, I got to talk to a bunch of the devs, and I got to test Pee-wee Mobile, because I didn't get a chance to play it on the show floor at the convention. And I got to have a very nice chat with the guy who was in charge of it all. And afterwards, Chris was saying, hey, Tarke, what do you think of Pee-wee Mobile? And I said, Pee-wee Mobile feels great to play. The phone gets a bit hot, but you'll hopefully solve that. But the gameplay, it feels like Path of Exile. The thing is, I don't play Path of Exile for the gameplay. I play Path of Exile for the problem solving, and I play it for the items. I'd much rather have a companion app, because that would let me plan out, and it'd facilitate the stuff that I really care about. And Chris said, I completely get where you're coming from. The main thing I love about Path of Exile is the items. The items is like the holy grail of PoE. If you ever spoil that well, you kind of spoil everything. Whether you like Harvest or you don't like Harvest, you need to keep in mind GG will always be very precious of its items. If there's ever anything they'll be precious over, if there's anything they'll be overly cautious, it will be the items, because that is the core foundation of the game. If you ever break that loop, like the core item loop, you may as well just throw the game out the window at that point. So, yes, if you really enjoyed the deterministic crafting and you're sad that it's gone, well, it doesn't mean that it won't ever come back in some manner in the future. You also keep in mind, we could get a better system. We could get a system with less bloat, less menu. We could get a more organic system. We could get a smoother system in the not too distant future, which solves a lot of these problems. We shouldn't just go for the first problem. Like, they don't say, oh, this is the first solution, this is the best one, go for this. Because if you have this, you can't have anything else. Like, you add this core, you can't remove it. And, yeah. I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my video, by the way. And let me know if, like me, you're all about the journey and very little about the destination. But yes, have a good day. Bye-bye.